Hey, welcome back to another exciting edition of Shoe and Show. I'm your host, Matt Priest, and this conversation is critically important. It's super timely as we drop this emergency broadcast with our dear friend, Steve Reynolds, who's CEO of Jade Footwear. I'm joined with my partner in crime, Thomas Crockett. And Steve, we wanted to bring you in. We were at our board meeting not too long ago, and we were just kind of talking about how your life is turned upside down because of where you sit within the footwear supply chain globally. And so as we get set out, kind of walk us through who you are, what's your organization, and then let's just dive into your day-to-day of the conversations that you're having right now as it relates to sourcing.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Appreciate that. I'm the CEO of Jade Footwear. We produce 85 million pairs of shoes globally. We have customers in Europe, South America, and the US. Diversified outside of China, have 700 employees in China with 3 offices, an office in the UK, an office in Alicante, Spain. So we're pretty diverse as far as on the manufacturing side. We own and operate 10 factories ourselves, and we have 2 joint venture factories that we're partnered with in India. So our base is in China, Bangladesh, Vietnam, Cambodia, and now India. And it's a complex environment from a sourcing perspective. So the day-to-day from our side is what we try to be is a one-stop shop for these brands and retailers and agents where they come to us for market intelligence, trend analysis, design, development, production, and we're an end-to-end solution in regards to that.
So your phone's got to be ringing off the hook. What is the typical day in the life of Steve Reynolds currently in the midst on the front lines of the trade war?
Yeah, so I've spent the last 6 weeks traveling around Southeast Asia. It started before the announcement on April 2nd, knowing that that was coming. So going to the different factories, it's like China 25 years ago, where you're backpacking kind of in these areas where it's high heat. It's taking 5-6 hours to get to factories by car. It's a long process. It's a strenuous process. And not a lot of people have the ability, I believe, to do it today because it's extremely complex from a supply chain perspective.
What's it like with managing factories in different countries with this patchwork of potential tariffs coming out where, you look in India and you've got, that's on pause. Bangladesh is on pause, but those countries have very, very high rates that will hit on July 9th. And then you have China, which currently has a high rate of, almost 150% plus the added footwear tariffs. How do you navigate that when you're dealing with factories in so many different countries with so many different tariff regimes now?
Yeah, it's a moving target, and it's been a moving target. Prior to the announcement on April 2nd, the administration had put a 10+10 into China, and it was easier to manage when it was just China. But then when it became everyone else, it added complexity. And with the 90-day pause, there's uncertainty in the future as it relates to the tariff. So there are shifts happening, but nobody knows where it's going to settle. So it's kind of chasing a shiny object at this point. You need to diversify because that's smart business. And I think we've done that as an industry over the past, 5-6 years, even from the first administration when Trump implemented the 301s. But this added another layer of complexity where we don't know what's going to happen July 9th. Is he going to implement these tariffs back in place on these Southeast Asian countries that can't trade in large volume with the US just because the society itself is poor? So given an example, Cambodia buys 300 million worth of US goods and exports 12 billion. The administration to force them to buy more, but they're a poor country and it's very difficult for them to actually do that. But if you look at supply chain is 90% China for non-leather components. And that's where the benefit of China was. It was always a benefit from supply chain and speed to market. So when you look at a rapid reorder, and I give an example there, the shipping time from China to the US is 14 days from Xiamen to LA on a fast vessel. When you ship out of Bangladesh to the US, you're on the water 60 days, and you have to ship material to Bangladesh to then produce the shoes. So that's 30 days of shipping the material, plus another 120 days from PO to X factory, plus 60 days on the water. So now you're planning your business a lot differently than you were when you were just using China. You lose the speed to market.
What is the lead time for China?
So China can be 60 to 90 days on production because supply chain is in country. And then you're just talking about the time to make, produce, and ship, which in a lot of cases is 100 days to 120 days all in from China, right? So when we look at this from an industry, the complexity becomes when you start to diversify, you have to add in additional lead times. You have to add in additional complexities for shipping supply to that country. And then if something goes wrong, for example, you ship a bunch of material, you ship some outsoles, there's a quality issue, you're starting from scratch again. So you lose a lot of benefits to China, specifically on speed to market and rapid reorders. So when you're in the fashion industry, China itself is, the most ideal spot from a manufacturing perspective because you can buy less pairs and buy into it as it starts to sell. Now you have to think about, I have a longer lead time. I have to be really right on this product. And then I have to make sure that I'm baking in that lead time to when it's going to hit retail and hope that it continues to sell at the same velocity to the projections.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the supply chain, Steve, as a slinky, right? And let's say it's compact, it's in China, and let's say just a droplet of water is navigating through the rungs of it, it can move pretty quickly. The moment you elongate that out from China out to Bangladesh, Cambodia, Vietnam, wherever, it's just going to take much longer for that droplet of water to kind of cycle through the extended life of the slinky itself. And so that's what the supply chain is. How would you kind of rank? Let's take China out of it. Let's talk about the reciprocal tariffs and the Southeast Asian nations. How would you rank them in your mind from a risk versus potential opportunity? We've been in Vietnam forever. It's our number two supplier. Import numbers are just hitting today. And Vietnam sent us a lot of stuff this past month, just in March alone. So kind of how will you pole position each of these countries and handicap them?
Yeah, obviously on a short-term basis, Vietnam makes a lot of sense because, there's supply chain in country and, they can ramp up production in a fast pace. The challenge with Vietnam is the labor shortage. And there's a labor shortage because a lot of other industries have come into Vietnam. So the automobile industries, the tech industries, and those are better paying jobs and they're better working environments. So it's becoming a challenge. So from a long-term perspective, Vietnam is going to become obsolete at some point in time. A lot of companies have shifted into Cambodia, Indonesia, and Bangladesh. Now, Bangladesh, from a cost comparable perspective to China, is the best from a cost perspective. It's also the longest from a lead time perspective, and the efficiencies are a lot lower. So it takes a longer time to ramp up production. Cambodia has tremendous potential. We have 2 facilities in Cambodia, but I could tell you that we opened a facility exactly a year ago in April. We started production. We ramped up to 8 production lines, over 2,000 workers, and that factory is full. When I first went to Cambodia, it was mostly farmland. I felt like there was nobody there. My last trip, which was 3 weeks ago to Cambodia, it took me an hour to get through customs. And I just was amazed by the amount of building, the industries that have come in. So it's not just footwear. That's what, as we think we're isolated in the footwear space, where this is impacting everyone. So everyone's rushing in, and there's only depends on US, 16 to 18, 20 million people in Cambodia. So at some point in time, you're going to run out of labor there because everybody's rushing in. And then when you have a country like India, which has tremendous potential, but the Chinese can't get visas to go into India because of the governments, have some conflicts right now. Mm-hmm. Bangladesh has been open armed to the Chinese, and the Chinese have gone in with a significant investment. Europe has taken advantage of Bangladesh for a long time because of the duty benefits. And now it's going to benefit the US, and it's going to take a little bit of time. And I think Bangladesh for the future is probably the biggest opportunity. But again, that lead time until supply chain makes its way in country is going to be a challenge.
Another thing that's really important in this discussion is just the volume of pairs that come into the U.S. market. We import about 2.4 billion pairs a year to meet consumer demand in the U.S. That's almost 7 pairs for every man, woman, and child in America. It's a lot of shoes. You need a place that can make volume and quality and good price points, and also obviously meeting this huge demand for U.S. consumers. And there's only a small number of countries that can do that. And so just from your perspective, shifting back to China for a minute, there's a lot of discussion among consumers too about goods made in China. Trying to understand, why are we making in China? What advantages there compared? Why do we make so many shoes there? And I wonder, can you share your views on that? What advantages does China have, even outside of labor cost? What are the primary reasons that people make shoes there?
So, the China benefits, I believe there's several. Number one is supply chain. So you have your speed to market. Supply chain's in country. Number two is efficiency. There is no replacement to China when it comes to efficiency, and that's production efficiency. So, and the third is the fact that you can buy less pairs, like from an MOQ perspective, because that goes back to supply chain. So when you're shipping components out of China, you lose your MOQ benefits. MOQ is your minimum order quantity, right? So in China, for example, you can buy 1,000 a pattern on a fashion style and then buy into it, wait for it to sell, see if it checks. You can make a mistake and then recover from the mistake. But if you go to Cambodia or Bangladesh, you're looking at 5,000 pairs per style, right? Because and the factories, the other challenge today is that everybody's rushing out of China, right? Because China's basically shut down, zero exports. Take first a couple of retailers that are going to start shipping in the next couple of months. But mostly everything has been shut down. So everyone's trying to shift out. So now it became, a seller's market on the factory side. So you have some companies jumping over other companies, paying higher pricing just to get the production in the factory space because nobody wants to lose the season. So a big shift into Vietnam, another shift into Cambodia, and some shift into Bangladesh. And then Indonesia obviously is an opportunity, but from a lead time perspective, it's just as long as Bangladesh.
Can small companies get into these other markets? Or, we've seen a lot of times, some of our smaller brands are 100% in China for some of the reasons you're describing. But do you think there's an opportunity to shift to Cambodia or Bangladesh or some of these other places? Or is it still the situation where it's going to continue to be small brands, 100% China?
Again, with the factories having the power today, the challenge is maintaining a consistent production flow. So from a small brand perspective, if they come in with one order and want to jump back out, it's going to be extremely difficult for them to get a factory partner. The factories are looking for partners. They want long-term growth. And when you look at cost becomes a factor as well. So I'll give you an example. Cambodia's pricing is 5 to 15% higher than China. Vietnam is 10 to 25, depending on the complexity of the shoe. Indonesia, between 8 and 20%. India, around 10%, and Bangladesh, around 10%. Now, Bangladesh, 10% is pretty reasonable today if you look at it from just from a cost perspective. A lot of companies will take a 10% increase but again, they have to plan in another additional, factor with supply chain in addition to the logistics challenges of shipping from Bangladesh.
Let me ask you this, Steve. So as you just indicated, these things aren't done in a vacuum, right? It's not like you can go into Vietnam, Cambodia, and there's not the surge of demand that's going to drive up prices. I want to unpack more of the India opportunity because India on paper is phenomenal. It's the largest, most populated country in the world, young population, shared democratic values with the West. Mm-hmm. But it's always been a struggle because of the bureaucracy and just not the speed to market and entrepreneurial mindset that the Chinese have had in a broad sense. You said several joint ventures. You're obviously in India. Talk to us about what you think the future of India is, because look, the Trump administration is bullish on India. They pulled the GSP benefits from India back in the first term to incentivize the Indians to negotiate a free trade agreement because the president wants that. They're now negotiating kind of two agreements. One is the reciprocal agreement, but also a more in-depth structured agreement beyond that. So talk to me about your perspective on India.
India has a tremendous opportunity. I've been there 4 times in the last 2 months. We have a partnership we're working with down in the south part of India, outside of Chennai, and we're also up in Agra with a second partnership. 2 different worlds, north to south. When you go down south, 80% of the workers are women. You go up north, 80% of the workers are men. It's a very, very different dynamic between the two. The challenges are with India, again, with supply chain not being in country, you're limited to some, and they have high duties on imports from China materials, anti-dumping duties that add to cost. There's a tremendous opportunity for the India to India market. It's become the largest population in the world, and a lot of brands want to come in and take advantage of that and try to do business within India itself. On the export side, I feel there's an opportunity, but with India, there's always a little bit of sense of pause because you don't know if they're going to be able to deliver what they say that they can deliver. And reputation, kind of precedes them at this point with that, and there are challenges there. When you can't bring your technicians in, your QC team members in, specific from China, you can bring in from Taiwan, but there's less and less Taiwanese technicians today as the business has shifted. That becomes a challenge because you need people on the ground to protect your interests from a quality perspective and making sure that you're delivering. I don't want to say all Indian factories are the same, but it's been a challenge to get 100% shipping within the ship windows that you're expecting. And, it's been a challenge on quality and delivery. So I think it's a tremendous opportunity. I'm bullish on India, but you have to kind of go in eyes wide open with,
what's the lead? How long does it take to ship out of India to the U.S. market? And which ports do you call on there?
Yeah, you would probably go closer to New York if you're going to come from India. But the ship lead time is about 60 days on the water, all in. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. We did a delegation trip to Ethiopia back in 2016, bringing footwear companies to take a look at that market. It was really fascinating, kind of some of the things we're talking about these other factors that impact the decisions. Ethiopia at the time, conditions were stable, and there was a free trade agreement, so you had duty-free access, and also you had the labor costs were much lower than in a lot of places, and yet you didn't see the rush that you might expect, and there were a lot of other factors that went into that. I think people sometimes just focus on certain things and don't think about the broader picture. But from your perspective, kind of what are some areas where you see is maybe the next frontier? If some key emerging markets, are there any in the Western Hemisphere or Africa or in Asia where we're primarily right now? What do you see as kind of the new opportunities next, over the next decade, maybe?
Yeah, it's a tough question. There's no replacement to China, unfortunately. And I think that industry wide, I think it's diversification smart, and I think you don't want to be too high a percentage in any one country. So I think the sourcing dynamic has changed. The paradigm has shifted, I think, permanently as long as the Trump administration is in office. And you need to be able to be in several places to be successful. As far as any new development, I tried Ethiopia years ago, and you really couldn't get up and running because, footwear is complex. There's a lot of different constructions. There's a lot of complexity that comes into, the different components related. So you have vulcanized, injection, cement, all different classifications of footwear. It's not easy to just pick up and move. And, one of my favorite terms is we're not baking cookies. You're not going to just jump into a new emerging country and try and to be successful. You have to have some technical know-how. You have to have your team come in and really educate and help the factory grow up. I'll give you the example with Cambodia. Again, we moved 25 Chinese to Cambodia, and we're able to ramp up to 8 production lines within 12 months. And this was a group of workers that never made shoes before. So it's not impossible, but you need to have your team be able to work with local workers, teach them the know-how, and then help them so you can grow and be successful.
Let me ask you as we kind of head towards the end of this conversation, because I could talk to you all day, but I know you're busy, and by the time we publish it, it'll probably totally be changed. So let me ask you this. It's kind of a cultural question. We all have those people in our lives, in our family even, that have been highly suspicious and concerned about the U.S.'s reliance in a broad sense on China for supplying goods across the spectrum. And there's a lot more nuance to it. But right now, culturally, we're at this fever pitch to where the U.S., and it's been driven by the president, but it's also been an underlying issue for a long time, well before he even took office his first term. What do you say to people when you engage with them and they understand what you do, having business in China, telling stories about bringing Chinese workers into Cambodia to continue to prop up production there? What's kind of your elevator pitch as an American about why we still need the relationship with China, even if strategic tariffs on national security items and pharmaceuticals and other things might be in the works and maybe help continue to resource some of those things here. But there's a lot of nuance to this conversation. How do you kind of speak to it when you talk to your family and friends?
Yeah, it's complex because a lot of people don't understand shoemaking, right? I mean, you'll have retail buyers, you have government officials. When we're down in DC at the executive summit, everyone thinks it's so easy to get up and move. And we all know we're not moving large scale footwear manufacturing back to the U.S. One, there's nobody that wants to work in a shoe factory and make $15, $18 an hour and make shoes. And two, it's extremely expensive and complex. And to your point, as you've been on, media, it's extremely expensive from a cost side. And we know that today based on who's here. I think as a country, we're addicted to inexpensive product, and that all goes away if we continue to have these blockades, so to speak, with China, where we can't get access to that market and those type of goods. So there's no easy answer to it. I mean, I have this conversation. I try to educate. My family understands it because they hear me speaking to it. My friends are a little bit more, difficult. I have a lot of friends that don't understand why manufacturing is not brought back here to the U.S. and in a large scale way. But the easy answer to that is, one, as we learned last week at the board meeting. I mean, the attrition rate and the attendance rate, and the fact that you can't get access to the skilled labor needed to make footwear here in the U.S. and do it in a large scale way.
Yeah, that's for sure. One more thought too on this: the reciprocal tariffs. I mean, there's been a huge shift from China over the past 15 years. I mean, a very significant drop, almost 90% back in 2009, down to 56%. And a lot of these companies, and by value, it's an even bigger drop, much bigger drop. But the countries, as you mentioned, the companies that have moved to these other countries are now hit with new tariffs. And some of the places, Vietnam is going to be 46% if they don't get a deal on July 9th. Cambodia is 49%. And you mentioned just the population there. I mean, the concern is, what can these countries do to get a deal with the U.S.? I mean, what can they, how can they even the trade deficits if they don't have the population and the income to buy that much U.S. made goods? And so just wondering if in places like Vietnam and Cambodia, Bangladesh is another one, what are you hearing on the ground? Are you, is there any optimism that, just on the ground there, or is there just a sense of nervousness heading toward July 9th?
Yeah, there's so much nervousness, especially from, the factory side, because, again, you're looking at this, there's massive investments now shifting out of China. And when you think about investments, your infrastructure, your personnel and everything, and you don't know where to go because it seems like a moving target, right? If you're going to set up shop in Bangladesh and then he hits Bangladesh with a tariff post July 9th, or Cambodia at 49% is not affordable, right? And, Vietnam at 46 is also not affordable. So there's a tremendous amount of nervousness, not just on the factory and the production side, but also on the brand side here in the U.S. and the retail side. I mean, the people that I speak to are extremely nervous about how they're going to manage through, these tariffs if they do take effect, because that's going to create obviously less demand. It's going to be very difficult to hit on revenue numbers, and there's going to be closures, and it's going to start with small businesses, but there's going to be larger retailers that are impacted as well, and some brands, frankly, that won't survive through this. Yeah. So it is definitely a lot of nervousness, and it would be great to have some clarity. It's been a very difficult 5 weeks, and it feels like a year, honestly, the way.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
Well, Steve, we can't thank you enough for coming on and for this emergency broadcast, giving us your perspective. As I talk to you privately, as I think about the nervousness of the industry, you're the perfect guy at the helm of your company at the forefront of these sourcing shifts, because you are, I kid you not, like your mind is always churning on that next thing and that next pivot, that next agility point. And so for your willingness to come on and share that with us and our audience today, we really do appreciate it.
No, and I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you. And I'm happy to help anytime. Please don't hesitate.
Awesome, folks. This has been another great edition of Shoe and Show as we dive into the current real-time landscape from a footwear sourcing perspective with our good friend Steve. Steve's on the board of FDRA, an active member. These are the types of conversations we have on our weekly call every 2 p.m. East Coast time on Tuesday afternoons. If you're not an FDRA member and you want to become one, hit us up, shoot us a note at info@fdra.org so you can be a part of the industry global conversations relates to the challenges of this tariff landscape we find ourselves in. In the meantime, check out all of our entire catalog at shoeandshow.com and make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And until next episode, Shoe and Show is out.
Shoe In has been brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. For information about FDRA, visit fdra.org.